Well, before we start our Midrash, we need to acknowledge Devarim 8, verse 10. It says, "You'll eat and be satisfied. You'll bless Adonai your God for the good land He has given you." So let's do that. Abba, we have eaten and we're satisfied, and we thank you for the land. So in Yeshua's name we thank you. Amen. All right, so this is the Midrash on Torah portion Vayyeitze. This is what we read for the Aliyot. Our first verse, Vayyeitze. And looks like the print might be a little small on the slide on the comment side. It's the first verse that I have a comment on is from 28 verse 11, which is the second verse in our portion. And this is a translation from Art Scroll that reads, "He encountered the place and spent the night there because the sun had set. He took from the stones of the place which he arranged around his head and lay down in that place." Makom is the word for place. But Rashi's comment, I think it makes sense based on what he's told there about that place. Rashi's comment is, Scripture does not mention which place, but it means the place mentioned elsewhere, which is Mount Moriah. Concerning what is said in Genesis 24, and he saw the place from afar. But if you look at it, and when you continue kind of looking at it, the phrase, it's the same phrase from Genesis 35, 13, but we see that what is the promise made there? The promise is made there in terms of this, his dream sequence is his own commentary on the dream sequence, verse 16. Yaakov awoke from his sleep and said, "Truly Adonai is in this place," again, Makom place, "and I didn't know it." Then he became afraid and said, "This place is fearsome. This has to be the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." And so it says he named that place Bethel. So it seems like there's a connection between house of God, of course, and where the temple would eventually be set. So we also continue in verse 12. Sulam is the word there for ladder. So the sulam, or the ladder, was set earthward and moved and reached heavenward. This is Art Scroll. And comment. This is a comment by Avi ben Mordecai. In Jewish mystical writings, such as the Zohar, Jacob's ladder is the equivalent of a tree, Eitz, as is the Sephirotic tree describing the emanations or attributes of Yahweh, and a Tzalon Elohim, a supernatural image of Elohim. That's from Messiah, Volume 3. So in the mystical writings, it's kind of seen as basically an emanation or a description of God, and that's how I think we can see this. We see, of course, the connection we read we went to our gospel reading, which included this passage, John 1:51. He said to him, "Truly, truly, I say to you, from now on you will see heaven opening and the angels of Eloha or Elohim ascending and descending to the Son of Man." The Greek text reads "on the Son of Man." So you look at it in a sense that he is the ladder on which the angels go. He is the way to the altar in the heavenly realms. If you look at it as the two descending to the Son of Man. I think this is, of course, the Son of Man talking about himself in this sense. Of course, it is an allusion to being the Son of Man from the book of Daniel. So there are stones in this passage, or in this our Torah portion, and there's a number of connections between stones and Mashiach. If the stones represent Israel, Matthew 2:15's reference to Hosea 11:1 has a stones collection. So at that point, let's go first. We'll go to Hosea 11:1, which was not in this week's readings for the Haftorah at least, but it's a familiar passage that's quoted in Matthew. But Hosea 11:1 says, "When Israel was a child, I loved him, and out of Israel I called my son." And so in Matthew chapter 2, verse 15, we read, where he stayed until Herod died. This happened in order to fulfill what Adonai had said through the prophet, "Out of Egypt I called my son." So we can see from the Psalms as well as from Isaiah that those sections are about Yeshua. And what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 10 is that, "And all drank of the same drink of the Spirit, and they were drinking from the rock of the Spirit that came with them, and that rock was Messiah." So if from a first-person view, Jacob comes 12 tribes, and the tribes are also known as stones. That's where the stones, of course, we see the stones in the breastplate of the priest. But if from one person comes 12 tribes, and the 12 stones become one people, Israel, once broken into two, and then back to one people or to one stone, this is similar then to the prophecy from Ezekiel 37:19. It says, "Say to them, thus says Adonai Yahweh, behold, I will take the stick of Joseph, which is in the hand of Ephraim, and the tribes of Israel, his companions. I'll put them with it, with the stick of Judah, make them one stick, and there will be one in my hand." So, kind of to summarize, the bottom line would be that both the ladder and the stone or stones teach us about Messiah. But then you could say the whole thing is, and when we look at the Torah itself, as Paul also writes in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, it's all written for our benefit. Next verse here, 28:12, the dream. I'll kind of read through this. This is from the World English Bible. "He dreamed and saw a stairway set upon the earth, and its top reached to heaven. Behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. Behold, Yahweh stood above it and said, I am Yahweh, the God of Abraham, father. I'll give the land to you, give the land you lie on to you and to your offspring. Your offspring will be as the dust of the earth, and you will spread abroad to the west and to the east, to the north and to the south. In you and in your offspring, all the families of the earth will be blessed." So what this is kind of putting together is it's the same promise that Abraham and Isaac received. And has it come true? I think that it really has. The whole world has been blessed by Abraham and the God of Abraham. So, looking at the names of his children, Reuben, a Reuven, see a son, because, and the scripture tells, because Yahweh has seen my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. Shimon heard, because Yahweh has heard that I am unloved. Levi, or Levi, Levi is joined to. Now this time my husband will become joined to me or attached to me. Yehuda, of course, is praise. And when you look at the longer version of events here in terms of the wives that Jacob took, we see Rachel being the one he loved, but the line of Messiah comes through Leah, not through Rachel. Through Judah, through David, of course. Dan, or Don, judge or vindication or justice. Elohim has vindicated me, or given me justice, you could say. Naphtali, wrestling. Mighty wrestlings, I have wrestled with my sister. God, or Gad, a troop, or good fortune. And Leah said, good fortune has come. Asher means happy. Happy am I, for women have called me happy. Yisachar, wages. Elohim has given me wages, given me my wages or my earnings, because I gave my maid to my husband. Zebulon, bestowed or endowed. Elohim has endowed me with a good dowry. Yosef, add to me. May Elohim add to me another son. Binyamin, of course, son of the right hand. We'll see was an alternate name given at the time. And Dinah, of course, I have a little kind of to the next slide. Dinah is the feminine of Dan. The reason for the naming is not specific, but I read in this translation, it actually translated Dan or Dinah a bit differently, or gave a translation for Dinah or Dinah. I think more commonly pronounced in English as Dinah. That was in in 30 verse 8 or 21 says, after this she gave birth to a daughter and her named her Dinah, and then it translates that as controversy over rights. I did not research that, so I'm not sure why that would be the case. I always understood Dinah to be the feminine form of Dan, or judgment or justice or vindication. Have you read anything about that in terms of?
No. That does lead me to wonder what would be the feminine form of the other names.
Yeah.
Not that it matters, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question, I guess. If there are them, there are feminine forms of the other names. All right, so next topic I have is from chapter 30. It's the vignette of the speckled sheep and goats. From 30 verse 32 says, let me pass through your entire flock today, removing from there every speckled and spotted sheep, every black one among the lambs. and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and shall be my wages. First, I want to take a quick look, because the complete Jewish Bible, when that was being read today, I noticed that it said brown instead of black in that when that was being read. So I was wondering. Yeah, I think Jim, you were reading that when it said.
I said black.
Yours said black, but I was reading it. The complete Jewish Bible I had in front of me said brown. So I was wondering, what is the word here in 3032? It has here the word whom, and the interlinear here translates it as brownish.
Or King James called it.
I can check just a sec. Look up open the lexicon online here too. I can look up King James probably faster just with this reference, see what that text says.
Just noticed your phone case matches your shirt.
That's the kind of guy I am.
Got to be in harmony.
I can't sing in harmony, so the clothes can have to be in harmony. Okay. John sent some questions here. Bereshit 29:14. Isn't Lavan truly referring to not blood, but more so of the kindred spirit? Well, this is opening 29:14. It says, Lavan said to him, "You are indeed of my own flesh and blood." Well, the answer is it's very Jacob was his sister's son.
So there's a bloodline.
So there's definitely a relationship there. So I think that's quite clear. Yes, questions about the altar. We'll get to that in just a second. So we're looking at 3032. And we're going to check the King James. Well, 32? Yeah. The lexicon for whom says darkened, dark brown, or black. And the authorized version uses brown.
Who authorized it?
King James authorized it. And all the brown cattle. And it uses, King James uses brown in that passage. Brown, says brown, one of a flock of sheep.
So the Hebrew word for that is not really precise.
It's dark color, darkened, dark brown,
Okay.
or black.
Just a dark shade.
Dark. Yeah, the dark ones among the sheep. All right, so before we go to answer more questions that John had sent, some have used this vignette about the speckled sheep and such to say that this is a pseudoscientific rendition here, because mating by poplars or whatever thing that was been cut to have white stripes on it doesn't cause the animals to come that way. But it wasn't, Jacob didn't do this because he thought that would cause something. He did it because he was told to do it in a dream.
So it's a supernatural thing.
Right.
Not a common.
Yeah, it's not a pseudoscience. He did that in obedience to what he was told to do in a dream. It says by Adonai standing there next to him. It says, by that time when the flock was mating, when I lifted my eyes and saw a dream, and behold, the male goats were mating, were striped, speckled, and mottled. The angel of God said to me in the dream, Jacob, here I am. He said, lift up now your eyes and see that all the male goats were mating and striped, speckled, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban has been doing to you. So he's basically shown that in a dream, and that's how it turned out. Not because it was pseudoscience or magic. It was because it was what he was told to do by an angel of God.
Provide, and here's how you do it.
Yeah. Yep. So it was still an act of faithfulness that he did that. It wasn't, if he hadn't done that, it wouldn't have turned out that way if he obeyed what the voice of the angel told him to do. All right. Genesis 31, verses 19 through 23.
It says 35.
35. I can't read. Apparently, I can't speak. I do have those passages on slides. Starting verse 19. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole the teraphim that were her father's. Are the idols? Jacob deceived Laban the Syrian in that he didn't tell him that he was running away. So he fled with all that he had. He rose up, passed over the river, and set his face toward the mountain of Gilead. Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled. He took his relatives with him and pursued him 7 days' journey. He overtook him in the mountain of Gilead. God came to Laban, the Syrian, or the Aramean, in a dream of the night and said, be careful that you don't speak to Jacob either good or bad. Jacob caught up with Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountain, and Laban with his relatives encamped in the mountain of Gilead. Laban said to Jacob, what have you done that you have deceived me and carried me away carried away my daughters like the captives of the sword. Why did you flee secretly? You deceived me and didn't tell me, that I might have sent you away with mirth and with songs and tambourine with harp, and didn't allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly. It is in the power of my hand to hurt you, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, be careful that you don't speak to Jacob either good or bad. Now you want to be gone, because you have greatly longed for your father's house. But why have you stolen my gods? Jacob answered Laban, because I was afraid, for I said, lest you should take your daughters from me by force. Anyone you find your gods with shall not live. Before our relatives discern what is yours with me and take it. For Jacob didn't know that Rachel had stolen them. Laban went to Jacob's tent, into Leah's tent. So Jacob went to Jacob's tent, into Leah's tent, and the tent of the two female servants, but he didn't find them. He went out of Leah's tent and entered into Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the teraphim, put them in the camel's saddle, and sat on them. Laban felt around all the tent, but didn't find them. She said to her father, don't let my lord be angry that I can't rise before you, for I am having my period. He searched, but did not find the teraphim. And articles on this, I think I should probably enlarge the font size. It's a long comment. It goes on with the next slide as well. But I'll read that first and then kind of address John's question, which is kind of on the same topic. By saying now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them, the Torah testifies that Jacob uttered the imprecation because he suspected that an idolatrous servant had stolen the teraphim to worship them in secret. Had he even seen the slightest notion that Rachel had stolen them, he would have not have denied it so boldly, and B, never uttered a curse. He would have known that she had no desire to worship idols, but that her motive was to wean her father from idolatry. Because of her utter contempt for Laban's gods, Rachel placed them beneath her, says Zohar. In the sense of the verse, however, she simply wanted to hide them, and she knew that if she explained to Laban the way of women was upon her, he would not trouble her to rise. So, first of all, I think that she stole them because in the previous discussion, she had said that, well, I'm not going to get an inheritance. My father, he spent the money that should have been ours anyway, but for the dowry that was paid, but they're worth money, and she was planning to probably keep them as valuables. I'm thinking more than anything else. So, what John's question? Don't know that I have the slide that talks about the altar in here. It's in 32:43. Maybe I do. I don't think I do though. I don't. So 32:43 and onward. It says that Laban answered Yaakov, the daughters are mine, children are mine, the flocks are mine, and everything you see is mine. But what can I do today about these daughters of mine or the children they have born? So now, come, let's make a covenant, you and I, and let it stand as testimony between you and me. Yaakov took a stone and set it upright as a standing stone. Then Yaakov said to his kinsmen, gather some stones. They took stones, made a pile of them, and ate there by the pile of stones. Laban called it Yagar Sahaduta, pile of witness in Aramaic, while Yaakov called it Galed, pile of witness in Hebrew. Laban said, this pile of witnesses between me and you today, this is why it is called Galed, also HaMitzpah, the watchtower, because he said, may Adonai watch between me and you when we are apart from each other. This is what Laban said. Laban said, because may Adonai, or may Yahweh watch between me and you when we are apart with each other. if you cause pain to my daughters, if you take wives in addition to my daughters, then if no one is there with us, still God is witness, or Elohim is with us between me and you. Laban said to Yaakov, here is this pile, and here is the standing stone, which I have set between you and me. May this pile be a witness, and may the standing stone be a witness that I will not pass beyond this pile to you, and will not pass beyond, you will not pass this pile to beyond this pile to me, and the standing stone to me, to cause harm. May the God of Abraham, and also the God of Nahor, the God of your father, judge between us. But Yaakov swore by the one his father feared. Which is Isaac. Is there a difference between what verse 53, may the God of Abraham, also the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us? Yaakov swore by the one his father feared. So is it saying that the God of Nahor is different than the God of Abraham? Verse 54, Yaakov offered a sacrifice on the mountain and invited his kinsmen at the meal. They ate the food and spent the whole night on the mountain. So John's question was, that this was a dedicated altar to Yahweh. It was also used by Laban to worship his adulterous god Baal. If I describe this correctly, then this seems unique in Scripture. A single altar could be shared by Yahweh. So they built it doesn't seem to me that it was it was a pile of witness, not an altar of worship necessarily. You see in verse 54, it says Yaakov offered a sacrifice on the mountain and invited his kinsmen to the meal, but it doesn't say on that altar. It's not listed as an altar anywhere that I've seen. It's a...
But it is a mitzvah. What's the Hebrew word?
Ha-mitzvah, the watchtower.
Isn't that what later in the commands God forbid them to do, people to do, is set up a standing stone?
Yeah, you see, well, it's up in the place that Yah said, right? There's plenty of places pre-Moses where people set up places to worship.
Later it was no more.
For altars, no more, anyway. This is a pile of rocks.
So this is just a landmarker.
It is a landmarker saying, this is the witness between you and me of our covenant. It's a covenant between Laban and Yaakov, not an altar of worship per se. And Laban was hearing, and he invokes the name of Yahweh in his discussions here. And so he is addressing, he heard from the God of Abraham, and he's addressing Jacob using the name of the God of Abraham, not Baal. But he does appear in verse 53 to invoke perhaps a different God. If the God of Nahor was Abraham's father, was different than the God of Abraham. We know that this is basically a family of idol worshippers. Laban has idols. It doesn't appear that this is any sort of idol worship here going on at all. So I don't think this is a case of sharing of God, the God of Israel sharing an altar with Baal. It's not an altar to worship on. It's a covenant of agreement between Jacob and Laban that we won't be able to go beyond this standing stone to cause harm.
So their meal is they're celebrating the
covenant between them. Yeah. And then in verse 54, separate from this, Yaakov offered a sacrifice on the mountain and invited his kinsmen to the meal. They ate the food and spent the whole night on the mountain. So it seemed like it wasn't, if Yaakov's offering sacrifice, it's not to Baal, right? It doesn't say he's offering it
to
to,
mountain to do that.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not at
the standing stone. Yeah. And by his kinsmen, does that, it sounds like that means all of them together. In other places, it seems like Jacob's kinsmen are his own sons. Because you see earlier using the phraseology, he's sending his kinsmen together the stones. Laban sending his kinsmen together the stones. but then it says Yaakov offered a sacrifice on the mountain, invited his kinsman to the meal. And then the next verse says, early in the morning, Laban got up and left. So was Laban included in the kinsman of that sacrifice?
The way it's worded there sounds like he was a part of that meal.
It does sound like it as well.
But it could also mean, doesn't necessarily mean.
Yeah, it could mean his own family. Basically, we're now separate, but Laban's still there when they're doing that.
Well, he's waiting till morning to travel.
Right. Okay, so he falls up. Rachel stole the idols from her father's house. These idols were allowed to be taken to be brought into the homeland of Abraham and Isaac. This seems to be a contamination. Adam and Eve didn't know to not eat of the fruit. Again, obviously, because perhaps there were no illegal ethical restrictions on Jacob or Rachel and their actions. I'm simply saying I'm well aware of the fact that Moses, the Ten Commandments, and tablets, and the Torah would not be written, would not be established for hundreds of years after Jacob. Well, it is true that that these items would make it into the land. I think in is it next week's Torah portion where when Rachel dies, they bury her idols, and so they're basically buried, which is essentially what we see archaeology-wise. There's lots of pagan idols that were found in the land of Israel, because the Canaanites and the other ites in the land were idol worshippers. We see that both Laban was an idol worshiper, as were, if his daughter shared in that, they're basically breaking free of idolatry by going with Jacob. But just like in the sense of, Israel had a hard time breaking free from slavery when they left Egypt. And they even brought a lot of their ideas with them of Egyptian gods. So even leaving Egypt, there was Mount Sinai, the incident with the golden calf. So Israel is constantly in a battle with idolatry, taking
traces of their past.
Yeah, right. They're sort of a trace of their past, or perhaps even you could say a dragging along an anchor with you, so to speak. All right.
An observation that I made, and not necessarily for comment, but it's just an observation. Seems Jacob's life, from his early manhood on, was filled with deceitful situations that he did. First, deceiving his father.
Mm-hmm.
Then it was turned around on him, then he was deceived in his wives.
Yeah.
Kind of like it was, hey, you deceived, so you will be deceived type thing.
Right.
And then him taking the women and idols and all that, he didn't know they were idols, but all that away from Jacob, he did it in stealth, by deception. And doesn't his name kind of mean that too?
Well, you see two translations for it. Hand on the heel and the supplanter.
Supplanter is the one I was thinking.
Mm-hmm. Don't know that means deceiver though, but
well, it's taking doing things by not stealth necessarily, but
by slicky boy.
Slicky ways, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Conniving.
Yeah, that's for sure. We definitely see that as kind of a repeated thing. It hasn't. This when he leaves here, he said he was afraid.
Well, that's what he was telling later.
But he explains his deception by being afraid, by saying he was afraid.
That could kind of be said about all of his other deceptions. He was afraid it would go against him.
Right. His deception wasn't that he said he was going to stay, right? I mean, what was the deception part of it that Laban is talking about? Is it just simply not telling him that he's leaving?
Mm-hmm.
Because
otherwise he would have said, in the morning we're going to be leaving.
He said in 31 verse 30, Laban says, "Granted that you had to leave because you long so deeply for your father's house."
Yeah.
So he understood that he was leaving.
Well, he understood he was longing for his father's house, not when he was leaving.
He said, well, could be. It says that you had to leave because you're longing for your father's house. Because remember, it's true that his father is still alive. Even though we talked about last week, his father was, on his deathbed, but he's still alive.
For a long time after his deathbed.
He's 14 years and 6 years, 20 years later, he's still kicking.
Yeah. But, that just, if not deception, then it's underhanded.
Yeah. It is it was by surprise or whatever, yeah.
To catch Laban off guard. Maybe. Or so that Laban couldn't prevent them from leaving. But it's in line with deception through his whole life.
Yeah. And the thing that is, there's another incident that's upcoming also, but with Jacob and deception is done to Jacob really to his son, so to speak. Because similar to the search we saw here, Laban looking through everything for the gods that were stolen, we'll see later a couple different times Joseph is being planted items for them to appear to have been stolen in the baggage of his brothers, so that they would be found. The search would find those things. Here, the idols weren't found. Here, they were planted and were found. But again, Joseph was using also deception to bring about.
Yeah. Seemed like that was a favorite tool of his.
Well, Joseph was bringing this about to bring Jacob into the land. Joseph was using the same sort of tactic of sorts by deception to, point the guilty finger at a brother or one of his brothers who actually hadn't stolen the gold or whatever it was when we get to that section.
God used his deception for the ultimate goal of the ultimate plan.
Yeah, it was used for that. And so again, the same thing I was mentioning earlier with Judah and Leah. If Jacob had the choice, he'd only married Rachel, and it's just Ephraim and Manasseh. They're come through Joseph that way, Well, Benjamin also, of course, but you don't have, the line of Mashiach comes through Judah, which is a daughter or a son rather of Leah, the unloved wife.
Yeah, there seemed to be a thread.
There is a thread of deception
through that whole lifespan there that God uses to bring about a certain end.
Machanayim. This is God's camp. So here's the Targum Jonathan for this passage. And Jacob said when he saw them, "These are not the host of Esau coming toward me, nor the host of Laban who have returned from pursuing me, but they are the host of the holy angels who are sent from before the Lord." Therefore, the name of the place he called it in the language of the sanctuary, i.e. Hebrew, Machanayim. Well, he saw them. It says this only has verse 32, verse 3 there, but the previous passage in the previous verse says, Yaakov went on his way, and the angels of God met him. So this is kind of an expansion of that. So the angels of God who are there, this is God's camp. So I said that these aren't messengers as in human messengers. I don't think. I think this use of melachim in Hebrew is talking about angels, and that would certainly be the agreement. What the Targum would agree with that as well. And that is
telling these stories because they're telling it in the third person. It wasn't Jacob writing these down.
Well, Moses is who wrote the Torah, but it may have been somebody else that gave it to him, or Moses got it by divine revelation. That's what the story happened here.
Because Jacob didn't say, and I got up and read it. It said, and Jacob got up and read it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when Jacob saw them, he said. It's not written like Deuteronomy from the first person, so to speak. But a lot of the rest, the first part of the Torah doesn't say it's from Moses' perspective either. Moses wrote it, but it's not from his perspective.
We still use what they call it, the majestic third party.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like the Queen says, we do not recognize that.
We do not.
The majestic plural, that's what it's called. Majestic plural.
All right. Well, that was my last slide, except for Spatzy's question slide. Where is lunch? Is there more? That piece of bread looks lovely, Mother. Let's pray. Abba, thank you for allowing us to midrash on your word, to study your word. Abba, thank you for the freedom to do that. Well, thank you for your wisdom and insight you've given us. In Yeshua's name we thank you. Amen.
Mm-hmm.